Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's program of Fired Up features Meilahn with curator Casey Ihorn. As many of you know, this year is the International Year of Glass as designated by the United Nations, but it's also the 60th anniversary of the studio glass movement. So that was a time where we really saw a shift from the factory settings to artists getting into the studio where they can really have the freedom to create. And Michael really is emblematic of that time. He's someone that took advantage to really push the boundaries of the material, to develop the work conceptually, and that really paved the way for the innovation that we're seeing in glass today. Before I get to the introductions, I want to mention that we will be taking questions throughout the program, so please put them in the chat. And if we don't get to them during the program, we will definitely cover them in the Q&A at the end. Okay, so I'm really thrilled to have our two guests today. Michael Meilahn was born into a Wisconsin fourth-generation farm family and discovered glassblowing at the University of Wisconsin River Falls, and then traveled to Europe to learn alongside the German glass legend, Erwin Eisch. Afterward, Mick spent a year in the Peace Corps in Bolivia, working alongside indigenous cultures, learning their agricultural traditions. Later, he earned a master's in art at Illinois State University, and then returned to the family farm to work the land, build a studio, and create with glass. Meilahn's work has been exhibited and collected in museums across the United States and internationally. And we also have with us today curator Casey Ihorn. He is the curator of collections and exhibitions at Bergstrom-Mahler Museum of Glass in Neenah, Wisconsin, and has organized Primordial Shift and the Art of Michael Meilahn, a retrospective, which is on view through August 21st. We're really thrilled to have both of you with us today and so excited to be able to share this program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Demetra, and thank you to AACG for allowing Mick and I to talk a little bit about Primordial Shift on this occasion of Primordial Shift and the Art of Michael Meilahn retrospective exhibition. I've had the opportunity to know Mick in several capacities, both as an artist as well as the previous president of the board of directors of Bergstrom-Mahler Museum of Glass, and as a friend. Mick's a wonderful human being. I think you're really going to get a lot out of today's presentation with regards to learning a little bit about his work as it relates to both farming, as it relates to genetic modification. Some of you have seen Mick's work in person, some of you have not, and so we've attempted here today to give you just a cursory look at the exhibition and at specific works selected for the exhibition in somewhat of a chronological order of creation. And so without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and start our presentation. Again, I just want to mention, please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we're happy to answer them if the time seems right. If it doesn't, we can answer them at the end if that makes a little bit more sense. So I am going to go ahead and turn over the presentation to Mick Meilahn. Mick, take it away.
Okay. Also, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this organization on Zoom. I think are going to start this with, you mentioned that I went to River Falls, and this particular piece that we have up there was part of my graduate exhibition. This has to do, this is 1974, 75, somewhere's in there. I think it was me. I was made in 74. And it was my response to our drug culture at the time. And I believe it was 71, Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and Morrison all overdosed in 1 year. If you take enough pills, it's going to get you. And that's what this piece was all about. This piece is called Coffin, and the capsules themselves are, I don't know, they're about 16 inches tall. And so the forms are all distorted. This is with the top off. And this was one of two pieces that I had in my graduate exhibition. And I'm happy to have it. I must say that when I got it out of the barn, it's been stored for a long time in the barn. These capsules were full of little critters, as you can expect being in a barn. And but having it all cleaned up and having it up again, I haven't seen it for years. It was kind of exciting for me. So I hope other people enjoy it as well. This was another piece that I had in that my graduate exhibition in Illinois State University. We also had our 1974 fuel embargo. And this, rather than calling this, these are again about 15 inches tall, the tallest one. There are 25 of them, and they're sitting on plate glass plates. And rather than just calling the piece Meltdown, I thought I would call it the same 25. In other words, we are going to be in energy crunches from time to time, regardless of where we go in the future. And this was the first one, and this is my response to it.
And Mick, certainly you and I have chatted about this at length, but if you look carefully at the forms, and specifically the kind of semi-cylindrical forms, those forms are also found in the coffin piece that we showed just a moment ago. So those white, almost capsule-like forms in the coffin work have been included as part of the same 25 pieces. And here's an image of the same 25 pieces, just maybe to assist with scale a little bit. This is a work that's 5 feet by 5 feet, and it's installed in the museum's Wisconsin gallery as a part of Primordial Shift. And Mick, tell us, what did you use for, it almost looks like a spark plug or on the top piece of each of these castings?
Well, in graduate school, obviously, we don't have a lot of money, and so scavenging lumber junkyards was my favorite place, because you can find things and repurpose them. And actually, I think that little top of that piece was some kind of a mold for casting plastic. And I saw it laying there, and I decided, well, I'll just cut it in half and use it as 2-piece mold. And this is where they ended up. The funny thing is that particular mold, and first of all, I should go back, the capsules were made, I threw those cylinders on a wheel, and then I took a plaster mold of them and then cast them into bronze to get the mold. But the funny thing about this piece is that I've used that little insulator mold all the way through my career on different pieces. And my current latest work, I've used it as well. So when these things are kicking around the studio from time to time, they kind of pile up, we lose track of them, they resurface, and suddenly it's like, aha, this would be nice right here. So I'm very open to all my work using older works, combining them into some kind of an aesthetic statement as I move through my career, which you'll see, and I'll explain as we go forward. Another early one, a little tough to take that pill, but it's a reaction to capsules and contrasting material. Those are just silicone. It's not a big deal. The bottom is cast bronze. Actually, I made the cast bronze when I was in haystack teaching. First formal style of work that I made after graduate school, I started at about 1980. I don't know, I think I made probably a couple hundred of these. Everything you see on the piece came off the top. So it's a two-color layer, and then you turn it into a cylinder, and then you flip half of the piece back on itself, and then take a shears and start. It's all done with straight shears, and you cut all those slots and then reheat them, smooth them out, and then push it back, flip it back into the piece. What really is quite nice about these pieces is that the negative space, in other words, this area, can you see? No, you can't see, I can see that. The negative space on the blue one in particular, it became a kind of when I was making the pieces, when you push them all back into a block, because they were all kind of flying all over, flipped way out. When you pushed them back in, you weren't really sure what kind of a negative shape you'd end up with. Of course, then when they were cold, I polished back through and exposed some of the interior. I call these finger vases.
And the works that we have of your finger vases on exhibit are from the collection of Roseanne Baum-Milius. So we're really appreciative to Roseanne for lending those for this exhibition. And just to give you an idea of scale, because this is a little bit more difficult, these pieces are roughly anywhere between about 3 and 5 inches high. I think even a few of them are maybe even slightly larger than that too, Mick, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I had quite a few of these that I dug out of the barn too, because of course I hadn't worked on these for years, and I had actually put some of these late pieces back up and started gluing some of those pieces together, 2 of them end to end, and that was fun. Looking back in the suitcase and bringing something out and just repurposing it. I worked with neon. I felt it was a natural working with glass to start working with light. Incandescent structures originally we just welded steel, and then I started working with neon. And when I bought a neon shop, I decided after I had about a year, and I never quite got it set up, I decided I'm going to sell it because it's just another technique, and glass is so overwhelmed with technique. I did not want to get involved, so I had these pieces neon bent for me to my need. But I made, I don't know, 6 or 8 of the taller pieces are 8 feet. Yeah, the one on the left was the last one I did. I never had this out of my studio. It is the only one I made with incandescent light and neon in the same piece. They're high-tech painted steel and mold make using putty to smooth out the weld joints, but the transformers are all hidden inside the pieces. The one on the right is probably the simplest form I made, but as the slots are in the front, there's 3 neon tubes in all of those pieces for contrasting red and blue lights. But in the back of that particular piece, there's a whole row of 1/4-inch holes that reflects back on the wire glass that's in the tripod in the back. So when you see it on an angle, those dots actually look like they're suspended in space. And the piece that I'm standing on of the other 2 items are cast aluminum. So very abstract, organic contrast with the high-tech painted steel. These were fun to make. The biggest one I made was on the corner of Wacker Drive and Michigan Avenue for a neon exhibition in Chicago in '91, and that piece was sold to an art collector. But that piece was 14 by 16 feet.
The piece immediately on the right here, Mick, that's a part of this exhibition, as well as this shades of purple on the left. So the 2 that have the cast aluminum, those are not included in the exhibition. The 2 that Mick is actually kind of touching in this particular piece, and the one on the right, which is in the show, that has this floating dot effect that Mick referenced. It almost has this ethereal quality. You don't quite get it from this particular image, but it's really one that has to be seen in person, I think, to appreciate.
And I think I made a total of maybe 20 of these, 18 or 20 of these, but I quit making them. 2 reasons. One, it's very, very hard to get out of the beer sign neon look. And when you work with neon, it's a real tough thing because everybody reacts to neon with as you kind of react to a beer sign. And I really, tried to work that out. And the other reason I quit is that moving these things, because they're high-tech paint, any little ding, it had to go back to the shop. And they chip so hard. So, it's a mechanical thing. And I got bored with them. I said, I'm going to move on. So my styles change dramatically over my career. Sometimes I just dropped things and just jumped and did something else. So it has a lot to do with my split professional life as farmer and as artist. It's very sad or disappointing at times to have to drop, say, a movement or a style of work at the same time. When I come back in the fall and I'm ready to come back into the studio and spend the next 4 months just really focusing on a new series of work, quite often, you know, it's intense because I can't wait to get to, there's no boredom at all. And I forgot about the problems of the other style and I jumped right into something new. And it's wonderful to have that opportunity. At the same time, it's somewhat of a curse simply because people follow a certain style, and that made gallery personnel nervous. They have to create a market for the artist, and when you jump around, it's very hard for them to follow. It's just the way it is. But
So,
the energy there to start something new was overwhelming.
the museum is especially appreciative, Mick, of you working with Derek and Anna Gran and Stephen and Bridget Yeomans to help us borrow both of these pieces. Those are both in private collections, and we really appreciate being able to add these as a part of this exhibition.
Actually, this piece was just put together in this past year from bars that I made over the last couple of years. I've been using them in quite a few different configuration and concepts. This is about 2.5 feet tall. Those are bars just kind of sit inside of one another, and so to take it up, they're very easy to ship. All 4 of those come apart. But I like the kind of tight looseness of it. You really don't know kind of from one angle what is going on there, but there's 4 separate bars that are curled on the end, and they just rest and nest into one another to form that kind of really abstract, linear kind of feel. It goes out all directions.
Mick, I just saw a question here, and it kind of relates to you talking about neon just a moment ago, and so maybe I'll ask it. Michelle Sharp asked, aside from just having the space, what are some of the other challenges of storing your materials and your work? You obviously have 50 years of glass that you're having to take care of. What are some of the challenges associated with that?
With storing them?
Storing and just caring for these pieces over this period of time.
Like I said, with my early peaks from 75, I hadn't seen them for years, and I have a lot of barns. I live on a farm, and space is not an issue. And typically what a farmer does, he puts stuff in the barn thinking he's going to use it down the road. Pretty soon things are full. Well, you just build another building. And that's such a luxury, because now that I'm trying to scale back, it's a real chore, but I'm finding all these treasures that I had before that I forgot. But I've been playing with these bars on this piece for 5 or 6 years probably. And finally, when I selected these 4 and kept playing with them, they came up to this configuration. I don't know if that answered his point, but yeah, storing work glass, making glass that's sculptural and fragile like this, and with the weight and armatures, you're going to run into breakage problems. So, you make work of glass, it's going to break. This came, I think these are sort of they may be a couple of 4 or 5 years in between, but they're all about the same time, and they kind of overlap. The blue part was cast into a graphite mold that was laid with graphite paper on the inside. And then we poured the mold. I lifted small pots out of the furnace, and we poured that blue shape. And before we poured it, I made the top piece, which was obviously orange on the inside and clear on the outside. And the blowpipe, then I had it on a pipe, keeping it warm, and then we stuck it into the surface. Excuse me. And the pieces were then annealed, and I annealed these for because they're such goofy configurations for at least 4 days, maybe 5 days, and then they were sawed, drilled, sandblasted, and decorated. But I was real hot on making blown glass and cast glass and making these big heavy pieces, and then putting them on armatures that were very light and delicate, repetitive. I used wood, stainless steel, I used bronze, brass, legs. This one is from Rick Connie's collection in Milwaukee.
And again, this piece about 8 or 9 inches high, just again for scale here. And then I saw a question just coming in from Jerry Paulson regarding the last piece. And yes, those bars in the last piece, they're all glass poles. Yes, sir. Not advancing. There we go. Sorry.
This was probably, this came after that work. Three materials: steel, concrete, and glass. We see it everywhere. And I think Jack Schmidt was the one that pointed it out early on in his career about looking at those 3 materials. But the way I used them was here taking functional work and then making them non-functional and using concrete on the inside instead of concrete always being on the outside as structural support. And then adding these little delicate things on the top and sandblasting. So it's reconstructing the vessel, so to speak. I never had these out either. I have them kicking around the shop for years and really didn't ever try to market them. And Casey, when they were out to the studio, they happened to get a spot on those, and we included them in the show. I think there are only 3 that way that I made. I used work with concrete and this technique, quite a few abstract pieces. Now they're 10 inches tall probably, and they're heavy.
Very architecturally leaning when I look at it in terms of composition. That's what I think of. And you'll see that, as Mick mentioned, he did go on to continue using the concrete in work, and we'll see a couple of those pieces here in a few minutes.
And this was a little bit later, but the top piece was made earlier, and the bottom half with the little funky legs was made during my phase of starting work with Korn in 99, probably. Those were made. And I didn't glue them together until the past a couple years ago. So these were UFO shapes. I made the tops funky. They're blown from the bottom or from where the feet are. And then I put different legs and different kind of structures under them. And they're fumed. If you can see on the right there, there's a kind of a sparkle to the black glass. What I liked about them the most was the funky tops. That was, you put a juicy lip wrap on them, and then you just push it into that little bubble iron to get that little funky look. But they were kind of freestanding, I glued 2 of them together, 3 of them together in different places, but they never went anywhere. I never had them out at the shop either, but one of those, oh boy, let's try this, see how much fun this is going to be. But
you're making me hungry, Mick, with juicy lip wraps.
Yeah, the lingo. The glass shop lingo. Here's one of the concrete, glass, and cast glass pieces, and then using more delicate, that's a half a polished twisted cane there, obviously, and then the square rectangle is a half square rectangle, the yellow part, that's a cross cut of a square glass block that goes into architecture, and that little black base on the bottom is wood. But I made quite a few of these where I'd make structures coming out of the concrete that were just simply decorative and architectural. It's the bottom purple glass is very architectural. And on the left is taking a piece of flexible pipe and for the ribbing and filling it with concrete. Of course, you had to bend the rebar and put that inside of there first. Again, typical construction materials for architecture, rebar and concrete, and then making these little delicate little scales or fins on the upper section. And of course, the yellow part is filled with concrete. They sit together there on a piece of found stone. What I like about this kind of thing is that it's partly found object art. At the same time, it's very organic, and finding the negative spaces around that nice juicy line, vertical line. I mean, it works. We don't have to do things in a real difficult way to make good art. I think I really have always liked this piece. I only had it out once, but what I like about it is its natural kind of sculptural movement.
And the elliptic fault work is about 26 inches. So it's a fairly good size piece in relation to some of the smaller pieces that we've seen in advance of this. Sharp as yellow, Mick, I'd say it's about 14 or 16 inches.
Yeah, something like that. These are the pieces I started working with. I called single cone, double cones. So making the same shape in the center and then putting the two together with a block Marini, and the little fingers are put on with silicone purposely, because if they were put on hot and you break one, well, it's history. This way, if they come off, they can be put back on, or I can replace them. The one on the left is the single cone series. I call them three-toed cones, but they're the offsets. So everything was offset. That section of yellow on the left piece, those are fragments of a platter, and they were hit with a hammer to get the shards, and then they were heated up in a garage, and each one, and then dropped a patty on each one, and tooled them together, and then annealed them. And so those pieces, that's a 1, 2, 3, 4 part piece. The ones on the right are a group using our really fun gold topaz that everybody knows who's in glass what gold topaz is. It's that wonderful amber color. And these were some offsets that I made as well. And they're also called the offsets with fractures. These were pretty good sellers. And all of these were made except, let's see, the one in the center and one on the left were made in the late 90s, I believe. Or 2003, I think I made these. So I'd work in the shop, I'd spend a week making cones, trying to make them some similar, and then the ones that I couldn't find that matched became the single cones. And then I'd spend a week making feet. And then I'd order these beautiful rectangles from glass companies that were used for trophies, trophy business, for engraving, and hit them with a hammer and to get the fractured pieces. What I liked about them, they're kind of constructional studies, if you will, because you just keep trying to work with the pieces until you find the right composition. But the offset is what really makes them work.
Mick, I have a question for you, specifically with regards to the single cone number 8 red, just for the purpose of this conversation. The top of the cone, the large kind of trumpet bell like feature, and then the base, the three-toed base that you're referring to, did those come from the same blow? Did you make those together and then split them? Or are they two separate pieces here? How did you go about creating that particular?
This is all batch glass. So we have a white pot, say, and a selenium red pot. That's a transparent. So you put the opal white on the inside, and then put the selenium red, which is transparent, over the top to get that opal look. But yeah, they were made out of the same pot or the same wheat. It depends, but you'd have a lot of these. The idea was to have a lot of them around so that when you started putting these pieces together, you had a selection because, and you just put the pieces together when they look right. It's like a big puzzle, only you're making individual pieces out of a array of objects. But I really like the idea of the offset. Okay, go ahead. Okay. I did quite a few freehand busts, if you will. This is one of the smaller ones, and I don't think this is 12, 13 inches high, but the top is blown and the bottom is cast. And just leave the band on there across the eyes, just leave it kind of mysterious. These are pretty simple in character, but I made a lot of them. So, and I made a lot of them right up until just a year ago. But I was squishing them and doing other things with them at that time. But it's kind of fun to pull the nose and to do the indentations. And of course, we've come a long way. There are people out there that, you know, work from the inside out and have made lots of tools just for this. But I never got that involved with it. I don't know, I must have made probably 50 of these, probably. I put them in different configurations, multiples. Sometimes I'd have 10 of them together. This is so we're all on the same page here. I farm half the year, and then I work half the year making glass, making art. And I'd like to reiterate that the farming and making art and glass is two professions that are very similar, more similar than they are dissimilar. In fact, they both take a lot of money up front to get started and nourish. An idea has to be nourished, just like a crop does. And what makes them so similar is the fact that we never know when we're going to get paid, and we never know how much we're going to get paid. It's very difficult to run two professions that are that sporadic. It's been a challenge, but at the same time, halfway through my career, the objects became my life, and my life became the objects. I don't know which, but I started working with corn. So to this piece is called stacked, and that refers to genetic modification when they engineer corn. Each time they add a gene for, say, herbicide, they call it a stack. When they add another one of any kind, say for a virus or say for a insect, they call it a stack. So we have corn, and we buy corn in bulk. We buy a triple stack or a quad stack, depending on how many traits we're after. So these pieces are called stacked. But what I like about them is they're stacked by logs. And so corn really is our superstructure. It is the foundation of our entire agricultural system, because we need a cheap, low cost calorie. And our whole society is based on this particular commodity. There are others, don't get me wrong, but for me, stacking this up and calling it a stack, and then wrapping those with wire, they're silicone together. They were grooved when I made them in those sections where they're logged together. But when I made them, they're switched every other one either way, and then I tied in with wire, and then they're electroplated to get the growth of, and you turn electricity up in an electroplater. They build crystals in one place and they build outward, so you get that very coral kind of look to it. So this becomes an organic, and not an organic, but a scientific advancement, and it's the foundation of our agriculture in one form, not the only one. 16 you got on this one? Yeah, that's about right.
The Mick has farmed on his family farm for the past how long, Mick, would you say have you been farming?
Years. Yeah, I've been, but I grew up on the same place where I grew up on the same property and same home that I have now. And when I decided to, after graduate school, I decided rather than go teach as a professional, as a professor, I decided I wanted to go back to the farm simply because I did not want to be a part of the academic world anymore. I wanted to be a part of the natural world because that's what I grew up with. As a kid, we had lots of freedom running around the cornfields and playing like they were our home, playing games in the cornfield. And it's just ironic. I had no idea and no intention of dealing with this subject matter until I turned 50. And at that time, I decided to make work that I understood. I wanted to make my work personal. And so I gave up all the decorative stuff and focused strictly on this particular cultivar because my experience in Bolivia is what really triggered that, because corn to the Native Americans has always been sacred, as well as many other traditions that's tied to the earth. And don't go in detail about that, but I learned a great deal by working with people who have so little. We basically are all made of the same stuff. Some people just have more toys.
And Howard, I saw your question here. Mick is in Northeast Wisconsin, is what we refer to this area as. The Oshkosh, just outside of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, is where Mick still lives on the same family farm.
We're into all of the corn stuff here, so that's kind of where I was going with that. I knew the corn stuff was coming up here. So there are different titles refer to different styles of work. I work a lot with arrowheads, and the reason I do, I was always a hunter and a gatherer. I learned that when on my grandparents' farm. I picked wild blackberries with my mother and my grandparents in the woods. I mean, that was something we did. But the whole idea, we have to all realize that we're all hunter or gatherers at one time. It's a part of our DNA. And if you think about our timeline, let's say 25,000 years we've been around. We've obviously been around much longer than that, but just say 25,000 years, 95% of that time was spent as hunter-gatherers. It's just the last, couple thousand years that we really took, technology and science to a different level. So my point is that making these arrowheads became something that I did simply because, I don't know, do I have the DNA? Yeah, obviously. So they became weapons, but they also became, in this particular case, as the title says, they became essential. So I like this idea, and you'll see that this idea of the arrowheads are a part of my current and my work the last 20 years. Primordial jump, this is I don't know, I made probably 20 of these that were on different, this is on stainless steel. This is probably, it's almost 30 inches tall, I think. This is part of in the show. But the bars, you're getting back to the bars, making these bars that would fit through the loop of the stainless steel, and then making holes in the ears of corn so they would slide on the tube. And getting the balance is a matter of just making these things, enough of them so that they work. And Primordial Jump is a title that I use for this, but the previous slide we talked about, I think the title was The Four Revolutions. No, not that one. Just go back to the current one. Because what I want to talk about on this one is this one also has the four revolutions. And what I refer to that is you have on the bottom, on the one on the left there, the long glass item, you have the arrowhead with a hole in it, which is no big deal, but it's representing hunter-gatherer. The next section is that same mold, that rib part, which came off the one I had in graduate school, and that represents our Industrial Revolution. So then when you go up to that whole section of the ear, this midterm right here, selective breeding took farming to a level that we never would have. I mean, the first crossbreds that we had in selective, we took corn from 40 bushel the acre and we went to 150 bushel an acre in a matter of 20 years. So that's the selective breeding section of the revolution. And then the holes, the distortion and the small ears being penetrated is genetic modification. So my whole idea is to add this symbolism that is more than just design. It becomes a part, it is a part of my DNA. I can't say it another way. Corn, genetic modification, and hunter-gatherer. And I drive machinery. So I got the whole ball of wax there in one piece. Okay, this is what I call a mixed closet. On the left, there's the detail on the right, but on the left, things that I collected on the farm. There's a calendar from 1943. It's only about postcard size in the bottom. There are objects in there that I put in there, from horseshoes to handmade tools. One of my large ears of corn that has a dice in it. They're my friend John Clark's graduate school work in there. Piece of Gene Koss's poster, along with Salvador Dali and some of my heroes in the art world. And there's one little clip somewhere. It says, "Art should be the most provocative thing in the world." This kind of thing is, like, for me, is it's personal. And we all have closets. We all came from someplace. We all cherish some things more than others. Here are the ones and zeros, which represent the binary code. So there's lots of stuff in this, and I wasn't going to put in the show, but Casey and Amy decided that it should be a part of it, and I guess I'm okay with it. So, but it's not a representation. It's more a representation of my personality, I think, than anything. I made a lot of cast pieces. There's 3 there. One is in the show, but it's hanging on the wall. The first one on the left, called "I Thought I Saw a GMO." And of course the head turns, that's sitting on there. So I told Casey, when nobody's looking, every day, turn it about a quarter of a turn and see how many people who are here off and on, and when they realize it's moving. But these were called the corn crib series. So we have to store grain to get by through the winter. So this is my take on, they're partly shadow boxes. At the same time, they were, I called them corn crib series. You could put anything on them. From left to right, it's "I Thought I Saw a GMO." The top one is Helios. And here I used a Greek name for the sun god on a different continent on the top of a Latin American cultivar. The corn is the red corn in each of those boxes. So I'm crossing oceans here purposely, if you will. The next one over is called Millennium Man, and that's sitting on these little Corinthian corn curls. And this is my response to the Renwick Gallery having the corn on the Corinthians. When it was built originally, they have corn on the top of the Corinthians as decoration, as a tribute to the American Indian. And the one on the right is those boxes open up, and a corn stack again on the top without the electroplating. And each box that you open the door for each one, there is a square, which is a Marini, and it's 2 inches, roughly 1.5 inches. Each one's different. On the back of each one, I cut out sections of Farm Progress or Successful Farming Magazine abstract wish list and glued them to the back. So when you look at them, when you open them up, there's something that I took out of a time frame from a certain time and put it in these treasure boxes. These are 2 later pieces. The one on the left is called George. So I took how much I had learned about blowing heads, and I made these distorted shapes. I forgot, there's a little statement that goes with them, and I kind of forgot to write them down to read them to you, but I forgot. But anyway, one on the left is called George. Each one of those get closed, doors closed and open. I made a mold the same size, and I blew it into those molds to get them rectangular. And the one on the right is called Squeeze. This piece, I actually made this casting. It was a round wheel that I took a recap. When you redo truck tires, big truck tires like semi trucks, they wear out, they take the tire off and they recap them with a 1-inch strip. It's galvanized onto the tire so they recondition them. Well, you can buy that stuff. So I bought a 5-foot piece of it and wrapped it in a circle, stapled it together, and cast it into plaster, and then cast it into our infamous O.J. Gabbert white glass, which we all got at one time from Fenton. But anyway, when it was cast, then I cooled that piece for 6 weeks so it wouldn't break. But when I got it out, I took a hammer and broke it into 10 pieces or 8 pieces. And this is one section. And I never used those pieces. I did that in 78, I believe. And I never used them. Been around the shop. I've had 50 different things sitting on them until I took one of the large ears that I made and I sawed it in half and put it on top and call it a boat. This is a hand free blown head. I made a whole bunch of these and I put them on top of the shadow boxes. So this piece is called, what is it called? Journey?
The Journey.
Yeah, The Journey. I think it's poignant for my work because it took me a long time to get to this point. So personally for me, and we have to think about where we've been with this one cultivar in particular. And you can reference any cultivar that way, go back in time and see where it came from and see how much history there is. And there's a ton of it for this cultivar as known as corn. So, okay, I'm ready to go forward. How much time we got here, guys?
We're getting towards the end. We do want to leave just a couple minutes for questions, Mick. So, but I do want you to be able to talk about a couple of these pieces here, especially.
This is Minefield. This is the first conceptual piece I made. These actually were to hang off, and it was my response to genetic modification. This is 95. I think I made this 96 actually. But when I turned 50, I decided to make work that was like this. And so I made these large glass balls. Some of them are 1.5 feet, 2 feet in diameter, and just glued these ears on them and then hung them on the floor, 10 inches or a foot off the floor, and hung them on bungee cords. And then when you bounce them, if you pull those down or you have them 4 feet up and you pull them down on the floor and let them fly, they just bounce all over the place. And of course, breaking these in the photography studio was intentional so that we could get the footage. And that's how I got involved with video, because I wanted to crash these things. I wanted to hear the sound. I wanted to see it. And then I wanted to sweep it up and hear the janitor sweeping the crushed glass off the floor. This is a concept. And so this is where my work really took off and became all conceptual with my motif, the ear of corn, if you will. The last piece, no, not quite the last piece I made just recently. I made this in 19, but I made the basket. 2 things to note here. The zigzag, or this is called the stair step sign. This is indicative of Native Americans. You see it on ceramics, you see it on blankets, everywhere. There was, I made the basket and I used this particular zigzag because it's quite detailed, but it refers to the terraces. They built all these terraces on hills and dragged the dirt all up there so they could be self-contained and out of harm's way. But there's ones and zeros on the floor, these large ears of corn, ones and zeros, a binary code. There are arrows on the floor. This is all about Native Americans kind of encompassing where we are today, but it's all spilling out. And it's an abundance in one hand, and the other and it's a piece of history. It's a real tribute to Native American culture and all the cultivars that they provided. Hundreds of them came from the Americas, especially South America.
Yeah, corn's been cultivated. I think we chatted about this, Mick, for as much as 10,000 years, from, originally a small grassy plant called teosinte to what we know now. I think in the United States, just last year, the US produced something like 15 billion bushels of corn. And it's absolutely amazing. I think now 92% of the corn that's grown in the United States is genetically modified. And most of that genetic modification is done to prevent pests, to get pests off, and for herbicide and fungicide purposes. But this is another, just a close-up detail of the imagery on the basket here. And then Bonanza Blue as it's installed in Bergstrom-Mahler Museum of Glass. Another installation, just a shot of the installation, or next to the installation, rather.
I want to go back up once. How much
Sure.
time? How much time we
Go
have?
ahead, Mick. You're good.
What is called the Three Sisters? There's three dice on the front that are separated. They sit in these little pockets. So this is a reference to corn, squash, and beans. A legume, a large for it. The bean, the legume would curl up the corn. It became the trellis. I think a lot of you are familiar with this. And the large squash largely became the shade that controlled weeds. That was the idea, and they planted these three things together because the bean then produced nitrogen that the corn needed. So they became the Three Sisters. But to Native Americans, that's a pretty sacred thing. The three, they look at the Trinity very differently than we look at what we understand in Christianity, because it came from Mother Earth. When I was in the Peace Corps, before anything demonstrations we did, we had a flask of alcohol. That's pure alcohol that we used to heat our food with. But you drank it, and you would tip your little spoon to say for Mother Earth before you drank anything. I mean, they love the earth. We could all do a little of that in this country. Anyway, later piece. This is one of my favorite pieces of my life. These are bronzes that are on the wall. And I've had a lot of these kicking around. I worked with bronze for the last 25 years off and on. And individually, they're okay. But finally, when I started putting them all together as one, and all these pieces being made over a 10 or 15 year, about a 15-year period, when I could put them all together, and I sent a picture to my friend John Clark, and I said, "What do you think of this?" And he sent me back a note and said, "They're like notes." And that's exactly what they are. So I called this piece Pursuing Harmony. Thank you, John Clark. Because that's exactly what I was doing. I was trying to pursue a life farming with genetically modified seed and making some sense out of it. The real theme here that I'm going after with this genetically modified issue is that we cannot exist without it, and that the reality is in this world of overpopulation and overconsumption, we are going to use up our natural resources. And when I refer to natural resources, I mean our phosphate and our potash. And those are two things that we cannot grow anything without, and they are definitely finite. So looking at this piece from a side view, you get all this stuff kind of popping off like I see when I walk through a cornfield. All these leaves are in my face all the time. And it's basically kind of somewhat of a jungle of beauty. And that's the way I see this. A lot of these things on there look like little eyeballs. They're intended that way. There's arrowheads. Genetic alteration is going to change the way we look at plants, the physicality of it. We're going to change all that stuff because science is going to take us there.
Jerry mentioned the bars earlier, and here's another example of that bar form finding its way into Pursuing Harmony. The last piece that we want to share with you as a part of the presentation today is Primordial Shift installation. And this is in Mick's collection, but it's courtesy of David J. Wagner, LLC. We're really appreciative of David for making Primordial Shift a possibility. I'm going to show you first just a gallery shot of the installation, and then I'll let Mick talk about this as I show a video of the installation in action with all of its video accompaniment. And the video is a partnership that Mick made with his lifelong friend, Nick Nabel.
So it all started when I started using bungee cords, and I wanted to photograph the bungee cord, the glass actually breaking. So this is the far end of, you saw the minefield. So now this is Primordial Shift, and there's been many pieces similar to this along the way. The top leaves are put on like a spider, and they're relatively some of them are 5 feet across, some of them are only a couple of feet. The ears are almost 4 feet, and the hole in them are all made so that one single 1/2-inch cord fits everything. So when I put this up, it's pretty simple. Like once they're anchored, the cords, you put a bronze on, and then you put a 1/2-inch knot, keeps it in place, and drop it through the ear, and you're good to go. So these can be set up. I've had them set up in many different configurations. This is the tightest I've ever had them. So when you push them, they clink and clatter against the metal, and they actually hit the glass, because the glass being thick, it makes this kind of, spooky kind of sound. And that's the whole idea, because the visuals are DNA, fields of corn growing, but imagery lasts only 1 or 2 seconds or a fraction of a second. And it's the same, there's 4 projectors going. It's the same one on each one, but they started at random. So, but the beauty of this is the background is kind of fuzzy, but the sharp shadow is what you're looking at on the wall that's dark and black, the contrast. And then when you get them all moving and you have the images moving behind it, you have this full-on 2D, 3D experience where it consumes and it becomes a form of entertainment. All with the goal in mind of forcing viewers to think about where our food comes from. I'm one of 2% of the population that actually farms. That's crazy. That's in the United States, that we are that disconnected with most of the people. Anyway, I'm sorry I talked too fast or too long, but we're running out of time, I see.
No, Mick, I just wanted to mention here, with regards to Primordial Shift, that your exhibition, your retrospective, will be up at Bergstrom-Mahler through the 21st of August of this year. So if you find yourselves in Neenah, we'd love to show you around the exhibit. And just wanted to mention here that Mick will be doing an artist gallery talk on July 28th. So in the middle of the summer, from 6 to 7 at the museum. And I know we just have a couple minutes left. I do see a few questions that popped up, but I thought maybe we could just see if we have any other questions, and I'll close out of the share here so you can see more of Mick, which is, I know why you're here.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you, Mick. I'm going to go ahead and just stop the recording so people can unmute themselves and just feel free to ask you questions directly.
Okay.